Media fact checker. Melbourne couple charged with slavery and abuse of Indonesian woman. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Chi Kit Chong and Angie Ling Lau, Malaysian nationals, are facing slavery charges in Victoria's County Court for allegedly enslaving an Indonesian woman in their Point Cook home between January 2022 and October 2022. The alleged victim, a 61-year-old Indonesian woman, was initially invited to stay for a month in early 2022 to assist with childcare after Angie Ling Lau gave birth to her second child. Chi Kit Chong allegedly accused the woman of causing a financial loss, a company credit card, and demanded she work off the debt, escalating control over her life. The woman was allegedly beaten, deprived of food, and forced to sleep on the stairs or in the garage as punishment for failing to meet Chong's demands. The alleged victim was ordered to perform domestic tasks including cleaning, cooking, and massaging Chong's legs, and was punished when she fell asleep during the massage by being hit with a vacuum cleaner. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC reports Chong allegedly told the woman she could leave if she paid $1 million, while Newscomau does not mention this specific demand. ABC states Chong's defense lawyer Diana Price suggested the woman may have exaggerated or embellished claims, but Newscomau does not reference this exact phrasing from the defense. Newscomau describes the woman as a pastor at the church where Chong attended in 2015, while ABC does not specify her role beyond being a pastor in Malaysia. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Australia Women's ODI Series win over West Indies in St Kitts. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Australia won the first women's ODI against West Indies by 103 runs in St Kitts, 341 all-out vs 238-8. Phoebe Litchfield top-scored for Australia with 77 runs in the first innings. Australia's total of 341 is a record women's ODI team score in the Caribbean. Stephanie Taylor scored her first ODI century since 2021 with 105 not out, 129 balls, 10 fours, 1 6. Georgia Wareham was named player of the match with 42 runs, 21 balls, and took 1 for 39 from 10 overs. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian states the second ODI is on Sunday, but ABC says it is on Monday. ABC does not mention the 75-run opening stand between Volume 50 and Litchfield, which The Guardian highlights. The Guardian specifies Taylor's century boundary was off Georgia Wareham in the 47th over, while ABC omits this detail. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Fatal plane crash in Queensland's Normanton due to tree collision and subsequent water landing. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Pilot Thomas Knight, 32, from Clifton Beach, Cairns, died in a MacJet International operated Beechcraft King Air B200 crash on February 6, 2026, near Normanton Airport, 700 kilometers west of Cairns. The aircraft struck a tree approximately 360 m, ABC, 800 m west of runway, from the runway end after climbing to 46 m, Newscomau, 150 feet, and descending rapidly, 1100 feet minute or 20 km per hour. The plane slid beneath power lines, yawed right, impacted trees, and broke up before coming to rest in floodwaters 580 m beyond the runway's end. The ATSB preliminary report, February 2026, found the aircraft was in a wings-level attitude at impact, with last ADSB data showing 300 km/h ground speed 10 m before collision. Rescue efforts for the pilot's body took 2 days due to crocodile-infested floodwaters and difficult terrain. The body was recovered on February 8. But not all outlets told the same story. Newscomau states the aircraft struck a tree 360 meters from the runway's end, while ABC reports the crash occurred 800 meters west of Normanton Airport, no explicit tree distance given. Newscomau reports the aircraft climbed to 150 feet, 46 m, above ground, whereas ABC states the climb reached 46 meters, no explicit altitude unit comparison. Newscomer mentions the pilot was preparing to return to Cairns shortly after 7:45 p.m., while ABC does not specify the exact time of the fatal flight. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. German celebrity couples' digital abuse allegations spark legal and legislative debates on online violence. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Colin Fernandez and Christian Ullmann were a high-profile German celebrity couple married since 2011, with a daughter, who separated in 2023-2024. Fernandez accused Ullmann in Der Spiegel of creating fake social media profiles in her name, distributing sexualized images, videos, and subjecting her to digital violence. Fernandez filed a legal complaint against Ullmann in Spain in 2023, citing stronger legal protections for digital gender-based violence there. Ullmann denies the allegations and has threatened legal action against Der Spiegel for its reporting. Fernandez has been publicly discussing digital violence for years, including a 2024 documentary on non-consensual pornographic content. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 claims Fernandez's abuse was primarily through fake social media profiles, identity abuse, while Article 2 frames it as AI-generated deepfake porn. Article 1 states Ullmann confessed to Fernandez after her 2024 documentary aired, but Article 2 does not mention this confession detail. Article 1 highlights Merz's historical vote against criminalizing marital rape in 1997 as context for his current framing, while Article 2 omits this historical detail. This story was covered by The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Barbie Dream Fest event backlash over poor execution and misleading advertising. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Barbie Dream Fest took place in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, last weekend, 2024. Event was organized by Mischief Management, which licensed the Barbie brand from Mattel. Tickets ranged from $69, day pass, to $449, Dream Pass, for adults, with $650 plus in some cases. Attendees reported receiving only a plastic hairbrush and Barbie-themed hand sanitizer in the Dream Pass swag bag. Photos showed sparsely decorated concrete-floored spaces with pink cardboard cutouts and minimal attractions. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian mentions a $452.50 Dream Pass ticket price, while ABC lists $449 or $655 in AUD. The Guardian references a disposable plastic pouch for swag, while ABC calls it an exclusive swag bag. The Guardian compares the event to Willy Wonka Experience and Lapland New Forest, while ABC only mentions Bridgerton Ball and Fire Festival. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Man accused of bombing Invasion Day rally may plead insanity defense. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Liam Alexander Hall, 32, is accused of throwing a homemade explosive device into a crowd at an Invasion Day rally in Perth CBD on January 26, 2026. The device contained a glass container filled with liquid, screws, ball bearings, and nails, described as a fragment bomb. Hall is charged with engaging in a terrorist act, intent to harm, and possessing explosives under suspicious circumstances. Hall is being held at Perth's Frankland Centre Psychiatric Facility awaiting a psychiatric assessment for a Section 27, insanity, defence. Simon Freitag is Hall's lawyer and has requested an 8-week adjournment to prepare a psychiatric report. But not all outlets told the same story. News Kamau states the court hearing was held on Tuesday, but Guardian and ABC do not specify the day. Guardian reports Hall did not appear via video link from the Frankland Centre on Tuesday, while News Kamau and ABC do not mention this. ABC describes the rally crowd as about 2,500 people, but Newscomer and Guardian both report approximately 2,500 people. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Angus Taylor's car theft and coalitions fuel excise protest amid political context. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Angus Taylor's car was stolen on March 27 from an address in Canberra's inner south. The stolen car was located later that day in Turner, a North Canberra suburb. The vehicle was taken to an ACT policing facility for forensic examination. The theft occurred just hours before Taylor was due to attend a press conference at a petrol station with Matt Canavan and Bridget McKenzie. ACT policing confirmed the theft via a statement to reporters. But not all outlets told the same story. Newscomer does not mention the 3-degree temperature or the shirt speculation, while SMH highlights it as a key detail. SMH implies the car theft was likely due to the empty tank, but Newscomer does not address this reason. SMH includes additional unrelated details about Gina Reinhardt's pack attendance and Joe Hockey's walk, which are absent in Newscomer. This story was covered by news.com.au and Sydney Morning Herald. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Sam Kerr's potential move from Chelsea FC to Denver Summit in the NWSL. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Sam Kerr is a 32-year-old Matildas captain and Chelsea striker with an expiring contract at season's end. Network 10 reported Kerr has signed with Colorado-based NWSL expansion club Denver Summit after 6 seasons at Chelsea. Kerr scored 110 goals in 153 matches for Chelsea since joining in 2019, winning 5 WSL titles and 3 FA Cups. Kerr posted on Snapchat denying the move, "Don't believe everything you read in the media, man, they know a decision before me." Denver Summit's owners include US ski star Mikaela Shiffrin and NFL legend Peyton Manning. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian states Chelsea's Champions League exit was on Wednesday night, while ABC says it was Thursday AEDT. The Guardian reports Kerr's Champions League exit is her last chance for the trophy, but ABC does not mention this context. The Guardian highlights Kerr's reduced role under Sonia Bompasta since her ACL injury return, while ABC omits this detail. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. US allows Russian oil tanker to deliver fuel to Cuba amid US blockade. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. The Russian oil tanker Anatoly Kolodkin is carrying approximately 650,000 to 730,000 barrels of oil, 650,000 per Guardian, 730,000 per ABC, bound for Cuba's Matanzas port. The vessel is sanctioned by the US, EU, and UK due to Russia's involvement in the Ukraine war. Cuba has faced a US oil blockade, leading to severe shortages of gasoline and electricity, with blackouts and rationing since at least 3 months, Guardian, or years, ABC. The oil shipment could supply Cuba's daily diesel demand for 9 to 10 days, producing about 180,000 barrels of diesel, ABC. Donald Trump stated, "I have no problem with the Russian tanker delivering oil to Cuba," emphasizing humanitarian relief over geopolitical implications. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC states the tanker carries 730,000 barrels of oil, while The Guardian reports 650,000 barrels. ABC claims the blockade has crippled Cuba's hospitals and public transport for years, while The Guardian focuses on a 3-month oil import gap and recent blackouts. The Guardian mentions the US lifted sanctions on Russia to improve oil flow post-Iran strikes, which is not referenced in ABC. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Tropical cyclone Narelle's rare landfall and iron-rich dust storm causing blood-red skies in Western Australia. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Tropical cyclone Narelle made landfall in Western Australia on Friday, March 27, near Exmouth, about 900 kilometers north of Perth. Shark Bay, Denham, 500 kilometers south of Exmouth, experienced an eerie blood-red sky due to dust storms ahead of the cyclone. The red sky was caused by iron-rich, rust-colored soil, red dirt, from northern WA's Pilbara region being whipped into the atmosphere by strong winds. Bureau of Meteorology senior forecasters, Angus Hines and Jessica Lingard, attributed the phenomenon to two factors: iron-rich soil and thick cloud cover blocking sunlight. The event lasted several hours, beginning around midday, and cleared quickly as winds from the cyclone picked up. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC reports the cyclone made landfall near Exmouth, 500 km south of Shark Bay, while Guardian states it hit 900 km north of Perth, consistent with Exmouth's location, but ABC's distance phrasing is less precise. ABC mentions the red sky began at 3:30 p.m. with specific timing from Kerry Shepherd, while Guardian does not provide a timestamp. ABC states the red sky cleared as wind picked up and rain arrived, while Guardian does not mention rain's role in clearing the dust. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Australia's teen social media ban effectiveness and unintended consequences. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Australia's under-16 social media ban took effect in January 2024, targeting platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Snapchat. Over 5 million accounts have been deactivated since the ban's implementation, according to the Albanese government. The eSafety Commissioner's February 2024 report found that 70% of teens, over two-thirds, remain on banned platforms. Facial age estimation technology has higher error rates for children near the 16-year age threshold, as noted by eSafety and experts. The Australian government has filed a defence in a High Court challenge from a digital rights group regarding the ban's validity. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 states the government expects eSafety to pursue fines for non-compliance but does not specify a timeline, while Article 2 implies the government's approach was doomed to fail from the start. Article 1 reports the government diverted 10% of anti-vaping ads to gaming platforms, but Article 2 does not mention this specific diversion detail. Article 1 highlights that platforms asked users aged 14 to 15 to adjust their age via facial recognition rather than deactivating accounts, while Article 2 focuses on the broader inaccuracy of facial age estimation without this specific detail. This story was covered by The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Northern Territory records multiple deaths in custody within a week. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. A 19-year-old man died from stab wounds in Katherine on Sunday evening after being found in a car by police, with first aid administered in a police vehicle before being taken to a temporary field hospital, Newscamau, ABC, Guardian. The Katherine stabbing victim's death is being investigated as a death in custody due to police involvement shortly before his death, Newscamau, ABC. A 26-year-old man died at Darwin Correctional Centre on Saturday morning after being found unresponsive in his cell. Medical assistance was provided but he was declared deceased, Guardian, ABC, Newscamau. A 25-year-old man died in police custody on Tuesday after experiencing labored breathing in the rear cage of a police vehicle in Darwin's northern suburbs, Guardian, ABC, Newscamau. The 25-year-old man was arrested following reports of an assault at Taiwi Gardens Retirement Village, Guardian, ABC. But not all outlets told the same story. Newscamau states the 25-year-old man who died in police custody was arrested following reports of an assault at a retirement village in Casuarina, while ABC specifies Taiwi Gardens Retirement Village as the location. Guardian does not mention the 19-year-old Katherine victim in its headline or initial description of the week's deaths, while Newscamau and ABC prominently include it as the third death in custody. News Kamau states the 25-year-old man who died in police custody was described as Indigenous, but this detail is not mentioned in Guardian or ABC. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Israeli Knesset passes discriminatory death penalty law for Palestinians, sparking UN and EU condemnation. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. The Israeli Knesset passed a new death penalty bill on March 11, 2024, making the death penalty the default sentence for Palestinians in the occupied West Bank convicted of deadly terrorism attacks by military courts. UN Rights Chief Volker Turk called the law patently inconsistent with Israel's international law obligations and warned its application in occupied Palestinian territory would constitute a war crime. The bill allows executions to be carried out within 90 days of sentencing, with condemned individuals held in a separate facility with restricted visits and video-only legal consultations. Israel has only applied the death penalty twice since its founding, in 1948, military captain for treason, and in 1962, Adolf Eichmann for Nazi crimes. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez condemned the law as a step towards apartheid and accused it of applying same crime, different punishment. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC reports the Knesset passed the bill late on Monday, local time, March 11, while The Guardian does not specify the exact timing but implies it was recent amid mounting international condemnation without a precise date. The Guardian states the bill's first vote occurred last week, March 4, but ABC does not mention this earlier stage, only the final passage. ABC emphasizes Spain's diplomatic standoff with Israel, including the ambassador's withdrawal and Madrid's opposition to US-Israel strikes on Iran, while The Guardian focuses solely on Sanchez's condemnation without detailing the broader rift. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Zach Lomax's rugby union debut with Western Force against Queensland Reds at Lang Park. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Zach Lomax will make his Super Rugby Pacific debut this weekend, Saturday 7:35 p.m. Australian Eastern Daylight Time, for the Western Force against the Queensland Reds at Brisbane's Lang Park. Lomax is named on the bench for the Western Force's Round 8 clash against the Queensland Reds. Lomax scored 2 tries for NSW Blues in the 2025 State of Origin opener, 18-6 win over Queensland Maroons, at Lang Park. Lomax kicked 3 crucial goals in NSW's 2024 State of Origin decider win, at Lang Park. Lomax's most recent match at Lang Park was in July 2024, when he scored 2 tries for the Parramatta Eels against Brisbane Broncos, underdog win. But not all outlets told the same story. No contradictions found between the two sources. This story was covered by ABC News. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. South Australia wins back-to-back Sheffield Shield titles by defeating Victoria in the final. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. South Australia won the Sheffield Shield final against Victoria at Melbourne's Junction Oval. South Australia claimed back-to-back titles for the first time in their history. Victoria needed 196 runs to win on day 5 but were bowled out for 139. South Australia finished at 139.5 on day 5, winning by 56 runs. Alex Kerr scored a century, 103, on day 4 of the final. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC Article 1 states South Australia was at 7-122 after 2 wickets in the first innings, while Guardian and The Age focus on the second innings collapse and day 5 details without mentioning this specific first innings score. The Guardian says Victoria lost their last 5 wickets for 27 runs and last 7 wickets for 37 runs, while The Age and ABC do not specify these exact figures. ABC Article 1 mentions Alex Kerr passing 50 in the first innings, while Guardian and The Age emphasize his 103 in the first innings and his partnership with McAndrew. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Bank of America settles $105 million Epstein-related lawsuit with victims. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Jeffrey Epstein died in a federal jail in August 2019 while awaiting trial on sex trafficking charges, with his death ruled a suicide by New York City's medical examiner. Bank of America agreed to settle a lawsuit for $72.5 million, equivalent to $105.3 million, with women accusing the bank of facilitating Epstein's sexual abuse through suspicious financial transactions. The settlement requires approval from U.S. District Judge Jed Rakoff, with a preliminary approval hearing scheduled for August 27, 2024, or earlier in the first article. Plaintiffs' lawyers, including David Boies and Bradley Edwards, may seek up to 30% of the settlement, $21.8 million, for legal fees. Jane Doe's class action lawsuit against Bank of America alleged the bank ignored red flags about Epstein's crimes and valued profit over victim protection. But not all outlets told the same story. The first article states the settlement was reached in March but terms were undisclosed until now, while the second article does not mention the March timeline explicitly. The first article does not specify the exact date for the final approval hearing, while the second article clearly states August 27, 2024. The first article includes the phrase threadbare and meritless in Bank of America's denial of deeper involvement, which is not repeated verbatim in the second article. This story was covered by ABC News. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Westpac CEO warns Australia faces recession risk amid rising rates and geopolitical tensions. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Anthony Miller, Westpac CEO, warned Australia could face a recession due to inflationary pressures and global tensions, stating there is a chance in interviews with ABC and Newscomau, March 2026. The Reserve Bank of Australia, RBA, raised the official cash rate from 3.85% to 4.10% in March 2026, marking the second hike in 2 months, Newscomau and ABC. Westpac and other major Australian banks increased fixed mortgage rates by 0.45 percentage points in March 2026, with NAB offering the lowest fixed rate at 6.04% for a one-year term, Newscomau. Inflation in Australia rose to 3.7% in February 2026, down 0.1% from January but still above the RBA's 2.5% target, ABC. Westpac's chief economist Lucy Ellis forecast 3 more RBA rate hikes by August 2026, ABC and Newscomau. But not all outlets told the same story. Newscomau states Oxford Economics warned Brent oil could peak at $190 per barrel by August 2026, but ABC does not mention this specific oil price forecast. ABC reports Lucy Ellis, Westpac, forecast 3 more rate hikes by August 2026, while Newscomau does not attribute this exact forecast to a named economist but references Westpac's broader rate outlook. Newscomau implies Miller suggested another rate hike would not be any worse than 2025 conditions, but ABC frames this as returning to pre-2025 rate reduction program levels, 4.35%, without direct comparison to 2025. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Australian aid worker Zomi Francom's death in Gaza IDF strike and ongoing investigation. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Zomi Francom, 43, and 6 World Central Kitchen aid workers were killed in an Israeli drone strike on their humanitarian convoy in Gaza on April 1, 2024. The Australian government commissioned former Defence Chief Mark Binskin to review Israel's investigation. His report, August 2024, found a significant breakdown in situational awareness and serious failures in IDF procedures. Binskin's report concluded the strike was not knowingly or deliberately directed against the convoy but resulted from errors in decision-making and misidentification. Israel's military advocate general is leading the investigation, which remains ongoing as of April 2025. 2 IDF officers were dismissed and 3 reprimanded over the strike. The Francom family has not received a personal apology or compensation from Israel, nor has the drone strike audio footage been released to them or the Australian government. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian and ABC report that Binskin's access to IDF intelligence was unprecedented per Israeli Ambassador Newman, but Binskin's own report notes he was denied the drone audio footage despite full access to other materials. Newscom Australia and ABC state the Francom family has not received a personal apology or compensation from Israel, but The Guardian quotes Newman saying sympathy has been expressed without specifying its form. The Guardian claims Israel's Ambassador Newman called Francom's death a tragic loss during Albanese's visit, while Newscom Australia and ABC do not reference this exact phrasing or timing. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Australian politician Andrew Hastie criticises US-Iran war strategy and economic fallout impacts on Australia. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Andrew Hastie is a senior Liberal frontbencher and Shadow Minister for Industry and Sovereign Capability. Hastie served as a Special Forces veteran and fought in the Middle East alongside American troops. Hastie stated on ABC's Insiders February 2024, that the US-Iran war was a huge miscalculation by Donald Trump. Hastie criticized Trump for not consulting allies like Australia before the conflict, citing lack of lead time. Iran has continued attacking neighboring Gulf countries and blockading the Strait of Hormuz despite Trump's claims of victory. But not all outlets told the same story. Kerr reports Trump declared victory over Iran's nuclear program, but ABC does not mention this claim directly. Kerr states Iran's proxies in Yemen have joined the fray, while ABC does not specify Yemen's role beyond mentioning proxies. Kerr highlights Hastie's warning about Australia's $1 trillion debt and economic vulnerabilities, but ABC does not detail these figures. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Global coalition meeting to reopen Iran-blockaded Strait of Hormuz amid oil crisis. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. A virtual meeting of 35 40-plus countries, including UK, France, Germany, Italy, Netherlands, Japan, Canada, South Korea, UAE, Nigeria, Australia, was convened by UK Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper on the 29th of March, 2024 to discuss diplomatic and political measures for reopening the Strait of Hormuz, excluding the US. The Strait of Hormuz carries 15 to 25% of the world's oil and gas supplies, pre-conflict, 20%, with 1,000 to 2,000 ships and 20,000 seafarers currently stranded due to Iran's partial blockade. Australia's Foreign Minister Penny Wong and Defence Minister Richard Marles attended the meeting, with Wong participating virtually. Australia's E-7A Wedgetail surveillance aircraft is deployed to the UAE for Gulf defence. Iran's blockade began after US and Israeli strikes on the 28th of February, 2024, with Iran threatening to restrict passage to nations non-compliant with its laws. Only 130 ships have passed daily since the conflict, versus pre-war 150-200. UK Foreign Secretary Yvette Cooper accused Iran of holding the global economy hostage due to economic impacts, rising food prices, and called for coordinated diplomatic, economic, and military planning to secure the strait post-ceasefire. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian, Article 1, states 35 countries attended, while ABC, Article 3, and news.com.au, Article 5, report 40-plus countries participated. News.com.au, Article 2, claims Australia fell far short of Trump's call to just take it, but no source directly quotes Trump using those exact words. Only build up some delayed courage and go get your own oil are cited. ABC, Article 3, reports Iran has virtually closed the strait, while The Guardian, Article 6, states it is a partial blockade with -130 ships passing daily, versus pre-war -150 or 200. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Travel expenses and affordability of Albania compared to other European destinations. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Albania is described as Europe's most affordable destination for summer travel by the author in both Thij and SMH articles. The author spent a week in Albania during late northern summer with exchange rates of $1 equals 55 cents and 54 Albanian lek, later updated to 60 cents and 57 lek, in both articles. The author visited Tirana, Vlor, Gjirokasta, and Sarand during the trip in both articles. The author rented a car for €325, $574, in Albania, as reported in both Thij and SMH. The author paid €1.55 for a coffee in Tirana in both articles. But not all outlets told the same story. No contradictions found between the two articles as they are nearly identical in content. This story was covered by Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Affordable flight options to Europe from Australia in 2026 amid Middle East instability. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. A business class return flight from Melbourne to London with Etihad in mid-April to early May costs $4,881, nearly half the price of 2025 and $2,000 cheaper than Emirates Premium Economy for the same route and dates. Economy class fares to Europe via Asia-based carriers, e.g., Air China, Malaysia Airlines, Qantas, Turkish Airlines, range from $1,295, Melbourne-London mid-April, to $2,599, Melbourne-Rome early September, comparable to 2025 prices. Return business class fares with Qantas, Singapore Airlines, Japan Airlines, ANA, or Turkish Airlines start at $12,000 for any departure in the next 6 months. China-based carriers and Vietnam Airlines offer sub-$10,000 return business class fares to Europe. Flights via the US, e.g., American Airlines, United, are safer but more expensive. Return economy from Melbourne-Sydney to London via the US costs $2,600 in May and $4,000 in July, while business class starts at $12,664, American Airlines, July, and $13,551, United, September. But not all outlets told the same story. No contradictions found between the two sources as Thij does not provide any distinct or conflicting information. This story was covered by Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Australian government announces gambling advertising reforms amid public health concerns. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Anthony Albanese announced gambling ad reforms during a National Press Club address on, date not specified but all agree it was recent. The reforms include a cap of 3 gambling ads per hour on TV between 6 a.m. and 8:30 p.m, ABC, Guardian, news.com.au. Gambling ads will be banned on radio during school pickup and drop-off times, ABC, Guardian, news.com.au. Online gambling ads will be restricted to logged-in users over 18 with opt-out options, ABC, Guardian, news.com.au. Gambling ads will be banned in sports venues and on players' uniforms jerseys, ABC, Guardian, news.com.au. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC and news.com.au report Albanese called the reforms the most significant reform on gambling that has ever been implemented, but Guardian notes the reforms fall short of a model proposed by former Minister Michelle Rowland, which was itself criticised as insufficient by advocates. ABC and Guardian both cite Albanese's claim that the reforms get the balance right between adult choice and child protection, but independent MP Kate Cheney, ABC, and Tim Costello, Guardian, call the response tinkering around the edges and timid, respectively. ABC and Guardian both report Albanese dismissed ACMA's 2019 findings that partial bans increase ad volume, but ABC explicitly quotes ACMA's data showing a 50% increase in gambling ads after partial bans, 2016 to 17 to 2018 to 19. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Israel's parliament approves death penalty for Palestinians convicted of lethal attacks. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Israel's parliament passed legislation making the death penalty by hanging the default punishment for West Bank Palestinians convicted of nationalistic killings or acts of terror against Israelis, ABC, Guardian 1, Guardian 3. The law applies only to future cases and is not retroactive, sparing Palestinians freed in ceasefire deals, ABC, Guardian 3. Itamar Ben-Gvir, Israel's far-right national security minister, spearheaded the bill and wore a noose-shaped lapel pin during debates, ABC, Guardian 3. The law will be enforced within 30 days of passage, ABC, Guardian 3. Israel's Association of Civil Rights in Israel petitioned the Supreme Court, calling the law discriminatory by design, ABC. But not all outlets told the same story. Guardian 1 frames the death penalty law as a new phase in Israel's dehumanization of Palestinians, while ABC presents it as a years-long push by Israel's far right with no explicit claim of escalation beyond prior policies. Guardian 1 states the law does not break from this system, it extends it, implying continuity, whereas ABC emphasizes the law is long sought by Israel's far right and a major win for them, suggesting novelty in political momentum. Guardian 3 reports that executions will be carried out by hanging, while ABC does not specify the method beyond default punishment and does not mention hanging explicitly. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Trump's proposed Miami Presidential Library and related controversies. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Donald Trump's presidential library is planned for a waterfront site in Miami, Florida, with a 50-story, Article 1, or 47-story, Article 2, tower. The land for the library was controversially gifted to Eric Trump's foundation by Miami-Dade College in 2023, with a federal judge initially blocking the transfer due to lack of public notice, later overturned. The site is valued at over $67 million according to Thomas Kennedy, Article 2, and sits on land gifted by Miami-Dade College to the state of Florida, which then transferred it to Eric Trump's foundation. Ron DeSantis signed a law renaming Palm Beach International Airport to the President Donald J. Trump International Airport on the same day the library plans were unveiled. The library's design includes a giant golden statue of Trump, a replica of Air Force One, gifted to Trump by Qatar for $400 million, and a replica Oval Office. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 states the library will have 50 stories, while Article 2 claims it will have 47 stories. Article 1 does not mention the building resembling a Vegas hotel meets aerospace bling, while Article 2 explicitly describes it this way. Article 1 does not reference Donald Trump's direct quote about the project being most likely a hotel, which is included in Article 2. This story was covered by The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Australian political polling shows Labour's declining support amid fuel crisis and Iran war backlash. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Anthony Albanese's Labour government primary vote dropped to 31% in the latest news poll, from 36% in November 2023 and 34.6% at the May 2024 election. One Nation's primary vote was 26% in the latest news poll, 2023 election, 26%, Redbridge poll, 29%. The Coalition's primary vote was 21% in the latest news poll, Redbridge poll recorded 17%, a record low. 72% of voters disapproved of US military action against Iran in both Newspoll and Redbridge surveys. Anthony Albanese's net approval rating was -17 in the latest news poll, down 18 points since December 2023. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 reports One Nation's primary vote dropped to 26% in news poll, while Article 2 does not mention this specific drop and focuses on Labour's decline. Article 1 states One Nation's primary vote was 26% in news poll, down 1 point, but Article 2 does not provide a direct comparison to prior One Nation polling numbers. Article 1 claims 61% blamed Trump for petrol prices, Redbridge, but Article 2 does not repeat this exact statistic or context. This story was covered by news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Asia's jet fuel export restrictions threaten Australia's aviation fuel supply. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Australia imports about 80% of its jet fuel annually, roughly 10 billion litres, with China and South Korea as major suppliers. China supplies around 1/3, 33%, of Australia's jet fuel, with monthly exports reportedly dropping from 2 million tonnes to 1 million tonnes in May. South Korea supplies about 18% of Australia's total jet fuel imports and 25% of its refined fuel imports, with domestic airlines lobbying for export redirection. The Strait of Hormuz closure, early March, disrupted Middle Eastern crude oil flows, impacting Asian refineries reliant on Middle East crude for jet fuel production. Australia's jet fuel reserves currently cover 30 days of consumption, with limited domestic refining capacity. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC states China's jet fuel exports have dropped dramatically and will be sliced in half to 1 million tonnes in May, while The Guardian cites Chris Bowen saying Chinese supplies are assured until late April or early May. ABC reports South Korea has capped jet fuel exports at last year's level with no plans to redirect supplies domestically, but The Guardian states South Korean airlines have asked their government to help redirect export-bound jet fuel back to the local market. ABC claims Korean Air is not considering any measures to ground any flights at this time, while The Guardian notes Asiana Airlines and Tway Air have already declared emergency management measures. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. 13-year-old girl charged in Melbourne's anti-Semitic crime spree involving stolen vehicles. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. A 13-year-old girl from the Bayside area was charged with 52 offences on the 26th of March, 2025, including reckless conduct endangering serious injury, multiple thefts, and threatening harm based on a protected attribute, anti-Semitism. The girl allegedly drove a stolen black Hyundai sedan in Hampton, Riponlia, and Caulfield between 25 to 28 March 2025, shouting anti-Semitic remarks and throwing eggs at pedestrians. On the 28th of March, 2025 at 7 p.m., the Hyundai allegedly swerved toward a group of Jewish families crossing Hotham Street and Glen Eira Road in Riponlia, narrowly missing them. A 45-year-old cyclist was hit by a stolen silver SUV in Brighton on the 24th of March, 2025, suffering non-life-threatening injuries after the vehicle allegedly rammed him from behind and fled the scene. A stolen white Volkswagen Golf allegedly rammed an e-scooter in Elwood just after midnight on the 25th of March, 2025, with the 3 occupants later arrested after a high-speed chase across multiple freeways. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian and ABC do not specify whether the Hyundai's occupants were female, while The Age explicitly states they were female. The Guardian reports the Volkswagen was seen on Beach Road in Black Rock before the chase, but ABC and The Age do not mention this location. The Age quotes Brooke describing the cyclist as in a stable condition with a list of injuries, while ABC and Guardian only describe injuries as non-life-threatening without additional detail. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and The Age. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Australian PM Albanese's housing tax reforms and energy crisis response amid Iran war tensions. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Prime Minister Anthony Albanese plans to wind back the capital gains tax discount and negative gearing to address housing affordability. Labour aims to build 1.2 million homes but is on track to miss this target. Albanese's government is rebuilding Australia's fuel stocks, which are below global standards, over 90% depleted. Opposition leader Angus Taylor criticised Albanese's televised address, calling it lacking in answers and leadership. Albanese adopted the coalition's policy to cut the fuel excise days prior to his speech. But not all outlets told the same story. No contradictions found between the two sources. This story was covered by Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Australia's 2026 private health insurance premium hikes and cost of living impact. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Private health insurance premiums in Australia will rise by an industry average of 4.41% from April 1, 2026, marking the largest increase in nearly a decade. For-profit insurers like AIA Health Insurance, 5.98%, NIB, 5.47%, Medibank, 5.1%, and Bupa, 4.8%, are leading the increases, while not-for-profit funds such as GMHBA are raising rates by 1.98%. Gold-tier hospital cover premiums will increase by an average of 13.3%, with HCF's Hospital Optimal Gold cover rising by 25%, adding roughly $167 per year for singles and $330 per year for families. The Reserve Bank of Australia raised the cash rate to 4.1% in March 2026, contributing to elevated mortgage repayments and broader cost of living pressures. Insurers attribute premium hikes to rising hospital wages, more expensive medical technology, an aging population, and increased demand for mental health and chronic disease services post-pandemic. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 states the 4.41% average increase is the largest in around 10 years, while Article 2 does not specify the exact time frame for the last significant hike. Article 1 mentions some customers facing even steeper jumps beyond the 13.3% gold-tier average, but Article 2 only cites HCF's 25% increase without additional examples. Article 1 highlights that petrol prices in capital cities have climbed above $2.50 a litre, while Article 2 does not reference petrol prices specifically. This story was covered by news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Formula 1 2026 Japanese Grand Prix qualifying and race setup at Suzuka Circuit. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Kimi Antonelli qualified on pole position, 1:28.778s, for the Japanese Grand Prix at Suzuka Circuit on March 28, 2026. George Russell qualified second for Mercedes, 0.298 seconds behind Antonelli, locking out the front row for the third consecutive race. Oscar Piastri qualified third for McLaren, 0.354 seconds behind Antonelli, while Charles Leclerc was fourth for Ferrari. Max Verstappen failed to qualify in the top 10, starting 11th after being eliminated in Q2 with a time of 1:30.326s, or similar range. Lando Norris qualified 5th for McLaren, while Lewis Hamilton was 6th for Ferrari. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC states Piastri was 0.354 seconds off Antonelli's pole time, while The Guardian reports Piastri was more than 0.3 of a second behind Antonelli, 1:28.778s vs 1:29.108s implied. ABC mentions Verstappen was 11th and described his car as undrivable, while The Guardian states Verstappen was 1.548 seconds behind Antonelli in FP3 and beaten by Hülkenberg's Audi. ABC reports Norris was 5th due to car issues, while The Guardian states Norris managed 8th, beaten by the Audis of Hülkenberg and Bortoleto. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Tottenham Hotspur fires interim manager Igor Tudor amid relegation crisis. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Tottenham Hotspur parted ways with interim manager Igor Tudor after 7 league matches and 44 days in charge. Tudor was hired on February 14, 2024, with a contract until the end of the season. Tottenham lost 3-0 to Nottingham Forest on March 22, 2024, marking Tudor's final match in charge. Tottenham sits 1 point above relegation with 7 games remaining in the Premier League season. Tottenham's 50-year streak in the top flight is at risk of ending. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC mentions Tudor's first match was a 4-1 loss to Arsenal, while The Guardian does not specify the score of the first match but lists Arsenal as one of the early losses. ABC lists Harry Redknapp as expressing interest in the role before Tudor's departure, but The Guardian does not mention Redknapp's interest. ABC states Tudor's final match was a 3-0 home loss to Nottingham Forest ahead of the international break, while The Guardian does not specify the timing relative to the break. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Jannik Sinner completes Sunshine Double at Miami Open 2024 after defeating Jiri Lehecka. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Jannik Sinner won the Miami Open title with a 6-4, 6-4 victory over Jiri Lehecka on March 2024. Sinner's Miami win followed his Indian Wells title, completing the Sunshine Double, Indian Wells and Miami. Sinner has now won 34 consecutive sets at Masters 1000 level since November 2023. Aryna Sabalenka also completed the Sunshine Double in 2024, winning Indian Wells and Miami. Sinner entered the Miami final with 11,800 ranking points, more than double Alexander Zverev's 5,205. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 states Sinner's Miami win was in straight sets, 6-3, 7-6, while Article 3 and 2 confirm it was 6-4, 6-4. Article 1 describes Sinner's serve as 79% effective behind it, while Article 3 does not mention this percentage. Article 2 claims Sabalenka's Sunshine Double was achieved through 3-set finals, but Article 1 and 3 do not specify the set structure of her final. This story was covered by The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. TT Line introduces 15% fuel surcharge on Spirit of Tasmania ferry tickets due to rising fuel costs. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. TT Line introduced a 15% fuel surcharge on new Spirit of Tasmania ferry tickets effective immediately, both sources. Fuel prices for TT Line increased by 80%, both sources. TT Line projects $50 million in losses due to rising fuel costs, both sources. The surcharge applies only to new ticket purchases, not existing bookings, both sources. Ken Konofsky is the chairman of TT Line, both sources. But not all outlets told the same story. News Kamau states the surcharge is a partial recovery considering impacts on customers and tourism, while ABC does not explicitly frame it this way. News Kamau mentions the surcharge may remain even after fuel prices drop to distribute costs, but ABC does not emphasize this as a primary reason. News Kamau explicitly calls TT Line a state-owned ferry operator, while ABC does not explicitly state this ownership detail. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. 20-year-old man accused of plotting WA terror attacks faces bail hearing. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Jason Joseph Michaels, 20, is accused of plotting a terrorist attack targeting WA Parliament House, police headquarters, and mosques in Perth. Police raided Michael's parents' home in Bindoon, 75 kilometres northeast of Perth, on February 2024, seizing a written manifesto, dozens of rounds of ammunition, guns, and knives. Michaels allegedly wrote in his diary, What I want to do to both these groups pales in comparison to today after the Bondi Beach attack, December 2023. Michaels appeared via video link from Casuarina prison during a bail hearing on March 2024. Magistrate Belinda Coleman refused bail, describing Michaels' diary as disturbing and not mere ramblings. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC mentions Michaels allegedly proposed joining the Army Reserve, not mentioned in other sources. The Guardian describes Michaels' plans as including an Iron Man-style metal suit and ambulance van, while other sources do not detail these specifics. ABC notes Michaels left a job after one day empty-handed, but other sources do not confirm this exact detail. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Fuel crisis impacts Australian tourism and travel plans during Easter 2025. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Rising fuel prices are causing widespread cancellations in the Australian tourism sector ahead of Easter 2025, with Queensland, $379 million, Victoria, $1.2 billion, and NSW, $410 million, experiencing significant drops in overnight visitor spending, Tourism Research Australia figures. The federal government announced a cut to the fuel excise in response to the crisis, aimed at easing costs for businesses and consumers. Fuel prices in K'gari, Fraser Island, reached $4.25 per litre, among the highest in Queensland and the country, according to RACQ. Tourism operators across southern Queensland, including Paradise Resort, Gold Coast, and Noosa Quad Bike Tours, reported booking cancellations due to fuel costs, with Noosa Quad Bike Tours seeing a 60% drop in bookings. Hannah Robinson from Drop Bear Adventures on K'gari lost $10,000 to cancellations in recent weeks, partly due to fears of fuel shortages and flight disruptions. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 states K'gari fuel prices reached $4.25 per litre, while Article 2 does not mention this specific price point or confirm it. Article 1 reports Paradise Resort's Easter bookings are 10% lower than average, but Article 2 does not reference this specific percentage or location. Article 1 highlights that ferry bookings to North Stradbroke Island stayed high, while Article 2 does not discuss this destination's performance. This story was covered by ABC News. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Melbourne storm forward Tui Kamikamika hospitalised after suspected stroke. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Tui Kamikamika suffered a suspected stroke on Monday morning after a medical episode. Kamikamika was hospitalised at Royal Melbourne Hospital and treated by hospital specialists alongside Melbourne Storm medical staff. Kamikamika played 25 minutes for the Storm in their 28-24 loss to the North Queensland Cowboys on Saturday, Article 1/2, or North Queensland in Townsville, Article 2. Kamikamika has made 142 appearances for the Storm since his NRL debut in 2017. Kamikamika has played 20 or more games in each of the last 3 seasons. But not all outlets told the same story. Article 1 says Kamikamika was hospitalised after a medical episode on Monday morning, while Article 3 does not specify the exact time of the episode. Article 1 and Article 2 mention Kamikamika played 25 minutes in a 28-24 loss to the Cowboys, Article 1, or North Queensland in Townsville, Article 2. Article 1 and Article 2 both mention Kamikamika was discharged from hospital, but Article 2 does not explicitly state inpatient rehabilitation as mentioned in Article 1. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Australia's 2026 Daylight Saving Time change and its regional impact. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Daylight saving ends in Australia on Sunday, April 5, 2026 at 3 a.m. local time, when clocks turn back 1 hour to 2 a.m. States and territories observing daylight saving include NSW, Victoria, South Australia, Tasmania, the ACT, and Norfolk Island. Queensland, Western Australia, the Northern Territory, Christmas Island, and the Cocos, Keeling, Islands do not observe daylight saving. Daylight saving returns on Sunday, October 4, 2026 in participating states. The change occurs on the first Sunday of April annually, coinciding with Easter in 2026. But not all outlets told the same story. No contradictions found between sources regarding core factual claims about the 2026 daylight saving end date or affected regions. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Philippines faces severe economic crisis due to oil price surges from Middle East conflict. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. The Philippines declared a national energy emergency on March 27, 2024, as the first country worldwide to do so due to the oil crisis triggered by the Middle East conflict. The Philippines imports nearly all of its crude oil from the Middle East, making it highly vulnerable to global oil price fluctuations. Fuel prices in the Philippines surged by 60%, Guardian, or more than doubled, ABC, since the conflict began, with diesel prices rising from P55 to P130 per litre. Transport workers, including tricycle and jeepney drivers, are the hardest hit, with many earning less than P500 daily, Guardian, and barely covering fuel costs, ABC. President Ferdinand Marcos announced on March 27 that the government secured enough crude oil for domestic processing until June 30, 2024, including a recent shipment from Russia. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian reports Marcos admitted supply challenges before announcing sufficient crude oil for June 30, while ABC does not mention this admission. The Guardian states fuel prices surged by 60%, while ABC states diesel prices more than doubled, from P55 to P130, a 135% increase. The Guardian cites Punong Bayan warning of $200 per barrel crude oil prices, but ABC cites Punong Bayan and Reyes warning of $150 per barrel in worst-case scenarios. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. US directs embassies to counter foreign disinformation using X and military psychological ops. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. The US State Department issued a cable signed by Secretary of State Marco Rubio on March 29, directing all American embassies and consulates worldwide to launch coordinated campaigns against foreign propaganda. The cable instructs embassies to work alongside the US military's Psychological Operations Unit, MISO, formerly PSYOP, to counter disinformation. The cable endorses Elon Musk's X, Twitter, platform, specifically its Community Notes feature, as an innovative and crowdsourced tool to combat anti-American propaganda without compromising free speech or privacy. The directive highlights coordinated foreign efforts, including from Iran, Russia, and China, to undermine US interests through disinformation campaigns targeting allies in Europe, Asia, and Latin America. The cable outlines 5 broad goals: countering hostile messaging, expanding information access, exposing adversary behavior, elevating pro-US local voices, and promoting telling America's story. But not all outlets told the same story. No contradictions found between the 2 Guardian articles. This story was covered by The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Massive Kit Kat chocolate theft disrupts European Easter supply chains. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. A truck carrying 413,793 units of Nestlé's Kit Kat new chocolate range was stolen in Europe on the 26th of March, 2024 during transit between production and distribution. The stolen shipment weighed approximately 12 tons and was en route from a factory in central Italy to Poland. Nestlé confirmed the theft via statements to AFP and The Guardian, stating the vehicle and contents remain unaccounted for. Investigations are ongoing in collaboration with local authorities and supply chain partners. The theft risks shortages for European consumers ahead of Easter, with potential diversion into unofficial sales channels. But not all outlets told the same story. News Kamau implies the theft occurred between 19 to 25 March, while Guardian specifies the 26th of March. News Kamau does not mention the Formula One line detail, which Guardian attributes to The Athletic. Guardian includes a direct quote about cargo theft being an escalating issue, which News Kamau does not reference. This story was covered by The Guardian and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Former AFL player Nick Stevens convicted of fraud in pool installation scheme. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Nick Stevens was found guilty on 12 counts of obtaining a financial advantage by deception and one charge of using a false document in the County Court of Victoria, ABC, News Kamau. Stevens was remanded in custody until his plea hearing on May 21, 2024, ABC, News Kamau. The case involved 6 families in Mildura, Victoria, who were defrauded of a total of $170,000 to $171,000 for pools they never received or had illegally installed, ABC, News Kamau. Stevens pleaded not guilty to all 14 fraud-related charges, ABC, News Kamau. Judge Fiona Todd denied an extension of Stevens' bail, stating she was unconvinced he should remain on bail, ABC, News Kamau. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC reports Stevens was 45 years old at the time of the trial, while News Kamau states he was 46, ABC versus News Kamau. ABC mentions Stevens had financial difficulty towards the end of 2017, while News Kamau states he had stopped working on projects by early 2018, ABC versus News Kamau. ABC reports Stevens' defense argued he tried to fix them after realizing he couldn't complete the jobs, while News Kamau does not include this specific phrasing, ABC versus News Kamau. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. AFL player Tristan Xerri banned for wiping blood on opponent's face during a match. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Tristan Xerri was banned for 3 AFL games for wiping blood from his nose onto Essendon captain Andrew McGrath's face during a match on the 29th of March, 2025. The incident occurred during North Melbourne's 12-point win over Essendon at Docklands Stadium on Saturday night, the 29th of March, 2025. Xerri pleaded guilty to serious misconduct at the AFL Tribunal on the 31st of March, 2025. Tribunal Chairman Jeff Gleeson KC described the act as disgraceful behavior and noted Xerri's hand was close to McGrath's open mouth. Xerri admitted in evidence that there was blood on his hand before wiping it on McGrath's face, despite it not being clear in video footage. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian and ABC mention Xerri was sledged with homophobic slurs before the incident, but only The Guardian includes the exact slurs, weak C-word, effing flopping C-word, in Xerri's own words. The Guardian states the tribunal hearing was held a day earlier than normal, while ABC and The Age do not specify timing differences. The Guardian and ABC both report Xerri apologized to McGrath, but only The Guardian includes the detail that McGrath took it very well and the conversation was good. This story was covered by ABC News, The Guardian, and The Age. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Victorian government expands device ban in schools to include smartwatches, headphones, and all school types. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. Victorian public, Catholic, and independent schools will ban internet-enabled smartwatches and wireless headphones from January 2027 as part of expanded device restrictions. Smartphones have been banned in Victorian public schools since 2020, with the policy credited with improving student focus, reducing distractions, and lowering critical incidents involving devices. Education Minister Ben Carroll stated the phone ban was a game changer and that 60% of children aged 7 to 12 use smartwatches, according to ABC and Thij. The new policy will apply to all 233 independent schools in Victoria, with compliance enforced through the Victorian Registration and Qualifications Authority. Exceptions will be made for students using devices for health conditions, as noted in Thij and Newskamau. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC reports mixed parental views on the ban's effectiveness, while Thij and Newskamau do not mention any parental opposition beyond general support for the policy. Thij states the government will introduce draft legislation on Wednesday, but ABC and Newskamau do not specify the exact day of the announcement beyond Wednesday. ABC mentions that Catholic and independent schools requested to be included under the policy, while Thij states the government is bringing all schools under the same rules without mentioning a request. This story was covered by ABC News, news.com.au, and The Age. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Teenage assault on paramedic after stolen car crash in Melbourne. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. A stolen Mazda 3, stolen from Mulgrave on March 21st, collided with a Volkswagen Jetta at Nicholson St and Victoria Parade, Carlton, just before 6 a.m. on Saturday. 4 teenage males were travelling in the stolen Mazda 3, 2 fled the scene immediately after the crash. A 19-year-old man and a 15-year-old boy were injured in the crash and taken to hospital by ambulance. A 66-year-old man and a 76-year-old woman from Terang were in the Volkswagen and taken to hospital as a precaution. The 15-year-old boy assaulted a paramedic during transport to hospital, requiring treatment for their injuries. But not all outlets told the same story. Newskamau implies the 19-year-old man assaulted the paramedic, while ABC explicitly states it was the 15-year-old boy. ABC mentions 2 teenagers are in police custody without specifying their ages, while Newskamau does not mention custody status. Newskamau refers to the injured teens as a 19-year-old man and a 15-year-old boy, gendered, while ABC uses 2 teenagers without gender specification. This story was covered by ABC News and news.com.au. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Australian study links vaping to lung and oral cancer risk. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. A new review led by researchers from the University of New South Wales, UNSW, found nicotine-containing vapes are likely to cause lung and oral cancers, based on evidence from 2017 to 2025. The review analysed mouse studies, human biomarker studies, oxidative stress, epigenetic changes, inflammation, and case reports, including a 19-year-old man with oral cancer linked to vaping. Australia's federal government in 2024 restricted vape sales to pharmacies for smoking cessation or nicotine dependence management only. Black market vapes in Australia often contain nicotine despite misleading labels, according to Alexander Larcombe, Curtin University, and ABC's reporting. The review did not establish a definitive epidemiological link between vaping and cancer but identified biological markers, DNA damage, inflammation, associated with cancer risk. But not all outlets told the same story. ABC reported Dr. Stewart said there is still no epidemiological link between vaping and cancer, while The Guardian framed the review as finding likely cancer risk without definitive numbers. The Guardian quoted Professor Stephen Duffy as saying vaping is not as harmful as smoking due to absence of combustion products, but ABC's Alexander Larcombe stated nothing inhaled into the lungs other than fresh air is likely to be completely okay. ABC emphasized Dr. Stewart's caution that vaping as a smoking cessation tool is not established as successful, while The Guardian's Freddie Seeters implied regulators should act despite inconclusive quit vaping evidence. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis. Media Fact Checker. Climate change threatens Australia's superb fairy wren with extinction within decades. All source articles are linked in the description below. Here's what every outlet agrees on. The superb fairy wren was voted Australia's favourite bird in 2013 and 2021 Guardian BirdLife Australia polls. Researchers predict the superb fairy wren population at Canberra's Australian National Botanic Gardens could go extinct within 30 to 40 years under intermediate and very high carbon emission scenarios, 2059 to 2062. The study found population extinction is likely to happen very fast within 30 to 40 years in intermediate and very high emission scenarios. The superb fairy wren suffered low breeding success during dry springs and reduced adult survival following unusually warm winters and hot summers. Researchers used nearly 30 years of weekly observations to track the bird's survival impacts from climate change. But not all outlets told the same story. The Guardian states the extinction risk is within 30 to 40 years under intermediate and very high emission scenarios, while ABC specifies 2059 to 2062 for extinction under those scenarios. The Guardian mentions extinction risk even under optimistic emission scenarios, but ABC does not explicitly state this. The Guardian does not mention the 50% mortality rate in the Botanic Gardens or the 70% mortality rate in Mount Ainsley's group. Only ABC reports these figures. This story was covered by ABC News and The Guardian. Subscribe to Media Fact Checker for daily Australian news analysis.